Each year, on or around Darwin Day, February 12th every year, we pause to celebrate the legacy of Charles Darwin, not as a saint, not as a prophet, but as a careful observer of life. A person who paid attention. A person who noticed patterns others often overlooked. A person who trusted that the truth about the world was not fixed or finished, but unfolding. Darwin did not give us a story about certainty. He gave us a story about process. He gave us a way of understanding life that is rooted not in permanence, but in change. Not in perfection, but in becoming. And that makes Darwin Day a deeply spiritual observance for Unitarian Universalists, even if it doesn't always look like one at first glance. Because evolution, at its heart, is not about the strongest or the smartest winning. It is about adaptability. It is about relationship. It is about responsiveness to changing conditions. It is about survival, yes, but also about creativity, cooperation, and persistence over time. In other words, evolution is a story of resilience. And resilience, our spiritual theme for the month, is not about being unbreakable. It is not about powering through, ignoring pain, or pretending that loss doesn't leave a mark. True resilience is something quieter and more honest. It is the ability to stay in relationship with life as it actually is, and to keep responding again and again with curiosity, care, and courage. Darwin himself knew something about this kind of resilience. We sometimes imagine him as a confident genius who had everything figured out, boldly declaring a new worldview. In reality, Darwin lived with a chronic illness for much of his adult life. He struggled with anxiety, bouts of depression, and physical pain that often left him bedridden. He experienced profound grief, including the death of his beloved daughter Annie, a loss that shaped him deeply. And perhaps most strikingly, Darwin delayed publishing on the origin of species for nearly 20 years. Not because he lacked evidence, but because he knew how disruptive his ideas would be, socially, religiously, personally. He knew they would challenge long-held beliefs about humanity's place in the universe. And yet, he persisted. Not with bravado, but with patience. Not with domination, but with observation. Not with dogma, but with humility before the complexity of life. That, too, is resilience. In Unitarian Universalism, we often talk about resilience as a spiritual practice, not something we either have or don't have, but something we cultivate over time and almost always together. We practice resilience when we allow ourselves to be shaped by experience instead of hardened by it. When we learn from change instead of resisting it at all costs. When we stay present to uncertainty without shutting down. Evolution teaches us that change is not an interruption of life. Change is life. Every species alive today is the result of countless adaptations, small adjustments made in response to shifting environments, limited resources, and unexpected pressures. Life didn't survive by clinging to what once worked. Life survived by experimenting, by failing, by trying again, by becoming something new. That is a holy lesson for this moment in history. Because many of us are living in a time that feels unstable, even overwhelming. The ground beneath us feels like it is constantly shifting. Social norms are changing. Institutions we once trusted feel fragile or unreliable. Climate change, political polarization, economic uncertainty, threats to democracy, these are not abstract ideas. They show up in our bodies, in our relationships, in our sleep, in our sense of safety and hope. In moments like this, resilience is often misunderstood as toughness, as the ability to endure endlessly without complaint. But evolution tells a different story. Evolution tells us that survival does not come from rigidity, it comes from flexibility. Resilience is not about going back to normal. Evolution reminds us there is no going back. There is only forward, into something not yet fully known. And that can be frightening. But it can also be sacred. Because Darwin's work invites us to see uncertainty not as failure, but as the necessary condition for growth. Vulnerability not as weakness, but as openness to relationship. Interdependence not as a moral idea alone, but as a biological fact. No species evolve alone. No organism adapts in isolation. Life endures through connection. And so do we. For Unitarian Universalists, this understanding sits right at the heart of our theology. We affirm that we are a part of a web of existence of which we are a part and upon which we depend. Darwin helps us see that this is not just a poetic statement, it is a truth written into the fabric of life. Resilience, then, is not a solo achievement. It is not something we bootstrap our way into. It is a collective practice. It emerges through community, through shared care, through the willingness to evolve together. In our congregations, resilience looks like showing up even when we're tired. It looks like telling the truth about burnout instead of hiding it. It looks like holding space for grief while still nurturing hope. It looks like new ways of being church when old models no longer fit the reality of our lives. Resilience looks like compassion that adapts. It looks like justice work that listens and evolves instead of assuming it already has all the answers. It looks like a faith tradition that is alive enough to change its mind. Darwin Day invites us to let go of the fantasy of spiritual certainty and embrace a spirituality of becoming, a faith rooted in curiosity, evidence, humility, and care for the living world. A faith that says we are not finished. A faith that says we are still learning. A faith that says survival is not about dominance, but about cooperation and care. And perhaps most importantly, Darwin reminds us that adaptation does not mean losing our values. It means finding new ways to embody them. Love evolves. Justice evolves. Community evolves. Not because they are disposable, but because they are worth carrying forward into new conditions. So today, as we honor Charles Darwin, may we also honor the quiet, persistent resilience of life itself. The resilience that lives in ecosystems recovering after fire. The resilience that lives in communities that refuse to give up on one another. The resilience that lives in our own bodies and breath, even when we are exhausted. May we trust that adaptation can be holy. May we remember that change can be faithful. And may we choose again and again to evolve, not toward perfection, but toward deeper love. May we cause it to be so. Blessed be. Amen. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Namaste. Thank you all so much.